They were well advertised, fearsome, dedicated soldiers who gave no relief.
For over 200 years, scholars argued fiercely about the origins of the Poland's first dynasty. Where did they really come from? Was it the written records that held the truth, or were those chronicles misleading? They couldn't agree. Researchers opened ancient crypts, extracted genetic material from thousand-year-old bones, and discovered something that no history book had ever clearly revealed. I'm very happy. I'm very proud of this discovery. The answer experts extracted from DNA analysis was so unexpected, it's rewriting everything we thought we knew about the nation's royal past. The mystery that stumped academia for generations now has actual proof. And you're about to find out what that proof shows. The mystery that puzzled scholars for 200 years. The royal family of the Piasts ruled over Poland for nearly 4 centuries from the 10th to the 14th century. They were the founding dynasty of the Polish state. The ones who united warring tribes, introduced Christianity, and established the first Polish kings. Figures like Mieszko I and Bolesław the Brave weren't just rulers. They were nation builders. Yet, despite their central role in Polish history, the origins of the Piasts have always been a source of debate and fascination. Where did they come from before they rose to power? For decades, scholars have wrestled with 3 competing theories. One claims that the Piasts were native Slavic nobles who emerged from within the region, the natural leaders of a growing local society. Another suggests they were Moravian exiles, displaced aristocrats from the east, who found refuge and power in what would become Poland. The third theory paints a more dramatic picture that they were Scandinavian warriors, possibly Vikings, who arrived from the north and carved out a kingdom through conquest. Each theory has its own evidence. Chronicles, legends, and archaeological finds, but none have been able to provide definitive proof, complicating matters further. Artifacts from the early past period reflect a cultural blend. Weapon designs and jewelry show both Slavic and Norse influences. Burial customs mix pagan and Christian rites. To take this raw material and produce an incredible steel sword. Even the architecture of early strongholds hints at multiple cultural inspirations. It's a puzzle with too many overlapping pieces, and every piece can be interpreted more than one way. Historians were left with educated guesses, but not hard answers. That's where this story takes a turn. Because sometimes the truth isn't found in books or legends. Sometimes it's buried in the earth, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to find it. Secrets in the crypts. In 2023, a research team led by molecular biologist Marek Figlerowicz at the Poznan University of Technology made a decision that would change everything. They decided to look for truth where it had been waiting for nearly 1,000 years. Inside the tombs of the royal family themselves, these are ancient crypts sealed for centuries, stone chambers that haven't been opened since medieval times. Pak Cathedral, located in what is now central Poland, held some of the most important royal remains in the country. When the research teams finally opened more than a dozen of these crypts, they weren't just looking for bones. They were searching for something far more valuable. Preserved DNA that could speak across the centuries in a language more honest than any historical record. The bones they recovered were dated between 1100 and 1495. And here's the crucial part. These dates matched perfectly with what written records had already told them. This wasn't a random collection of ancient remains. These were the genuine remains. Genetic analysis showed that several of the individuals excavated were close relatives to one another. The researchers were staring at family members separated by generations, all preserved in these crypts. When Dr. Figlerowicz stood up at a major conference in May 2025, he made a statement that resonated through the academic world. There is no doubt we are dealing with genuine pests. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was confirmation. The DNA analysis had authenticated the identity of the remains with scientific certainty. But the real revelation was still ahead. The team faced significant technical challenges. Extracting DNA from thousand-year-old bones requires extreme care. Contamination from modern sources could invalidate entire samples. The researchers had to work in specialized labs with strict protocols, handling materials with sterile equipment and running multiple tests to ensure accuracy. Each bone fragment tested yielded varying amounts of usable DNA. Some were nearly perfect genetic blueprints. Others were fragmentary, requiring careful assembly like archaeological puzzles. The Poznan group managed to isolate readable DNA from 33 individuals, 30 men and 3 women who were believed to span the entire timeline of the Piast dynasty. 33 windows into the genetic truth of Poland's first royal family. And they were all hiding a secret. The discovery that nobody expected. What came next shocked the entire historical community. When researchers examined the Y chromosome, the genetic marker passed down exclusively through the male line, they found something extraordinary. Almost all the male skeletons carried the same rare group of genetic variants. This was no coincidence. This was a signature, a genetic fingerprint that linked all these kings together across centuries. The significance of this uniformity cannot be overstated. Y chromosome variants are inherited patrilinearly, meaning they pass from father to son with relatively few changes across generations. A rare variant appearing consistently across 30 male individuals spanning nearly 400 years suggests an unbroken male line, a succession that remained intact despite all the political upheaval, wars, and dynastic changes recorded in medieval chronicles. This genetic continuity is actually remarkable because medieval history is filled with succession disputes, illegitimate claims, and contested inheritances. Yet, the DNA was telling a consistent story of uninterrupted paternal succession. But here's where it gets really interesting. This genetic variant, which appeared in almost every male past ruler, is not commonly found in Poland. It's not common anywhere in Eastern Europe. Instead, this rare Y chromosome group is primarily found in Britain. And the closest known match to the PA genetic profile belongs to someone who lived in what is now Scotland around the 5th or 6th century. Picked one of the ancient peoples of that region. The ruling line of Poland, the dynasty that shaped the nation for centuries, carried genetic markers that pointed back to the British Isles, specifically to Scotland. This wasn't a minor detail. This was a complete reframing of the pest's mysterious origins. The DNA analysis had revealed that the paternal line didn't arrive from nearby regions like Moravia or Scandinavia. It came from the vicinity of the North Atlantic. The implications hit like a shock wave through historical circles. For 200 years, scholars had debated whether the pasts were this group or that group, local or foreign, Slavic or Scandinavian. And all along, the answer to these mysterious origins had been written into their very cells, waiting to be discovered. The timeline question nobody can fully answer yet. In genetic genealogy, probably one of the first things that you want to do is to divide out. The DNA analysis solved the mystery of where the past paternal line came from. But it raised a new question. When did they actually arrive? And that's a question that's still being debated among researchers. The founding clan could have migrated to Poland centuries before the first well-documented pest ruler, Meszko I, who died in 992. They could have arrived generations earlier through a series of dynastic marriages as European nobles did back then. Or, and this is the possibility that keeps historians up at night, they could have arrived just one generation before the dynasty's rise to prominence. The DNA analysis could confirm the origin, but not the exact timing. This temporal uncertainty is actually more important than it might seem at first. If the Scottish lineage arrived in Poland centuries before Meszko I, it suggests a much deeper integration into Polish society. The family would have had time to accumulate land, forge alliances, and build local power bases gradually. They would have become local in every sense except genetics. But if they arrived just generations before Meszko, it tells a different story entirely. One of rapid ascension, perhaps facilitated by exceptional political circumstances or strategic marriages that catapulted an outsider family to prominence. The difference between these scenarios is enormous for understanding how the past dynasty actually consolidated power. What we do know is this. Meszko I is the first past we can point to with certainty in written records. He's the one who appears in chronicles, the one whose decisions are documented, the one whose reign marks the beginning of the dynasty's recorded history. But based on the genetic evidence, his family line stretched back further than anyone had realized, reaching across the North Atlantic to Scotland. The window between the Scottish Pict who lived in the 5th or 6th century and Meszko I in the 10th century is enormous. Did the paternal line make its way to Poland during that gap? Did it arrive in Poland centuries before Meszko, living quietly until the moment when a descendant would rise to rule? Or did it arrive much closer to Meszko's time? The DNA analysis gave us direction, but left the exact timing frustratingly open. This uncertainty actually points to something deeper. It shows that the mysterious origins of Poland's first royal family can't be solved by DNA alone. The full story requires pulling together multiple threads of evidence, and that's exactly what researchers have been doing. The population beneath the crown. Here's something that makes the DNA analysis even more interesting. While the research team was investigating the royal family's paternal line and its shocking Scottish connection, they were simultaneously discovering something completely different about the ordinary people of Poland. A separate genetic study looking at Iron Age cemeteries across Poland. And we're talking about sites thousands of years old revealed that common Poles living 2,000 years ago already shared the genetic makeup that appeared in early pest subjects. The general population wasn't changed by the pest's arrival. In fact, when you trace the DNA of prepist burials, you see the same conclusion reflected back at you. Local Poles were part of a broader continental gene pool that stretched all the way from Denmark to France. This continental genetic connection is crucial for context. The Iron Age peoples of Central Europe were interconnected through trade networks, cultural exchange, and periodic migration. Genetic similarity across such a vast region indicates population movements that happened long before recorded history. The people living in Poland thousands of years ago were already part of a larger European genetic landscape. They weren't isolated. They were connected to broader continental movements and mixings that created a relatively uniform genetic background across much of Europe. What does this mean? It means that even though the ruling line of Poland might have had exotic Scottish origins, the people they ruled over had been there for millennia, the population had continuity. They had roots. And when the pasts arrived, whenever that was, they didn't replace the local population. They ruled them. This distinction is crucial to understanding the full picture of these mysterious origins. The Piasts were foreign genetically speaking in their paternal line, but they governed a long-established community. The subjects they ruled weren't newly conquered people learning a new way of life. They were people whose families had lived in those lands for thousands of years with genetic patterns that remained remarkably stable across the centuries. So, the DNA analysis revealed a paradox. Exotic rulers over an utterly local population. A foreign dynasty governing a deeply rooted people. That contradiction is exactly what makes the past story so compelling and its mystery so hard to solve. The ecological revolution hidden in lake sediment. While the genetic evidence was being collected and analyzed, another team of researchers at Poznan was digging into a completely different kind of evidence. They weren't looking at bones or DNA. They were looking at ancient pollen trapped in the muddy bottom of Lake Lenica near Poznan, a lake that sits surrounded by islands and was often called the cradle of the pest realm. By studying buried pollen samples from the lake floor, they could read the environmental history of the region. And what they discovered was startling. Around the 9th century, right before the Pa rose to prominence, something dramatic changed in the landscape. The pollen record shows that oak and lime trees which had dominated the forest suddenly plummeted. At the same time, cereal crops and pasture indicators surged and traces of charcoal and soot point to something even more significant. Widespread fires. The researchers called this shift an ecological revolution. And they didn't use that term casually. Something fundamental had shifted in how people were using the land. The forests were being cleared rapidly, converted to agricultural fields and pasture land. The fires weren't accidents. They were part of a deliberate strategy to expand farmland and create space for military fortifications. Why would anyone do this? Why would you burn forests and clear land on such a massive scale? The answer is connected directly to the Piasts and their rise to power. The clearing was driven by slash-and-burn agriculture designed to feed concentrated garrisons of soldiers. These soldiers weren't just local militia. They were professional forces guarding the trade routes that brought wealth into the region. routes carrying amber from the Baltic and captives destined for slavery further south all the way to Rome. Amber trade was genuinely valuable during this period. Baltic amber was prized across Europe and beyond for jewelry, religious objects, and luxury goods. The trade routes carrying amber were major economic arteries. Similarly, the slave trade was economically significant in medieval times, with captives from Eastern Europe sold to markets throughout the Mediterranean. Controlling these trade routes meant controlling a source of enormous wealth. The past rise to power coincided with their strategic position on these routes. Geography combined with military force to protect commerce. The DNA analysis had revealed the mysterious origins of the ruling family. But the pollen analysis revealed something just as important: the economic engine that allowed them to thrive. Control of these trade routes meant wealth. Wealth meant power, and power meant the ability to hire laborers, clear more forest, and build more forts. But power wasn't just built with swords and silver. It was built with something far more subtle, something hidden in the soil itself. The feedback loop that built an empire. Here's where the research took an unexpected turn. Historians and complexity scientists didn't just study the pollen data in isolation. They used it to build something called a feedback model, a mathematical simulation of how population, tribute payments, and fort building would interact with each other over time. The model worked like this. As forests were cleared and fields expanded, more food could be produced. More food meant a larger population could be sustained. A larger population in the region meant more tribute could be collected by the ruling power. More silver flowing into the royal coffers. And as that silver flowed in, the chiefs and kings could hire more laborers to clear even more forest and construct even more forts. It was a cycle feeding on itself, each element pushing the others forward. Then something remarkable happened. The model, based purely on the environmental and economic data, accurately predicted the sudden and dramatic construction boom that happened around 990 at Pawsnangek and Guinea. Archaeological evidence shows a startling build-out of ramparts and fortifications. The researchers had predicted this without even knowing about it in advance. Their model had captured something true about how power and resources interacted during this period. But the model also predicted something darker. It predicted that once the silver stopped flowing, the whole system would collapse. And that prediction came true, too. After 170, the pollen data show the woodlands beginning to recover. Forests started growing back. Archaeological surveys reveal abandoned hamlets and shrinking military garrisons. The boom had ended and the cycle had reversed. This wasn't just economic history. This was the engine behind the mysterious origins and rise of Poland's first royal family. The Piasts didn't conquer Poland through military genius or political brilliance alone. They rose to power by controlling trade routes and converting that wealth into the ability to build fortifications and hire armies. They caught a wave of economic opportunity, rode it skillfully, and eventually saw it pass them by. The DNA analysis had shown us where they came from. But this ecological and economic evidence showed us why they succeeded. The great question that remains unanswered. Despite everything that has been discovered, the Scottish DNA, the ecological revolution, the economic boom and bust cycle, one major question still haunts researchers. How did a family with paternal roots in Scotland end up ruling Poland? The answer, most historians believe, involves something far more subtle than conquest. Dynasties in medieval Europe didn't always expand through warfare. They expanded through marriages. The noble networks of Europe were remarkably mobile. Kings married their sisters and daughters to other kings to form alliances, forge peace treaties, and cement political relationships. Medieval marriage diplomacy was sophisticated and calculated. A strategic marriage between a Scottish noble and a Polish family could serve multiple purposes simultaneously. It could seal a trade agreement, formalize a military alliance, or establish dynastic claims in new territories. The children of such unions would inherit dual legacies, cultural, political, and genetic connections to both regions. This practice was so common among European nobility that it created intricate webs of family relationships connecting distant kingdoms. A person in Scotland might be a cousin, aunt, or uncle to someone in Poland through a series of marriages arranged generations earlier. Consider the story of Swento, the sister of Bolalisev the Brave, one of the early past kings. She married the kings of both Denmark and Sweden. Her descendants eventually ruled England for a time. One woman, two major kingdoms, children scattered across a continent. This wasn't unusual for European nobility. So perhaps the Scottish connection didn't arrive through invasion or conquest. Perhaps a marriage alliance brought a woman or a man with that Scottish paternal lineage into the Polish royal family. Perhaps they arrived as a spouse and their bloodline simply took root in the soil of this emerging kingdom. The genetics don't contradict this theory. In fact, they support it. What's even more telling is what the DNA analysis showed about the common people. The ordinary Poles maintained their genetic profile, whoever ruled them. Whatever foreign blood flowed through the veins of their kings, the population itself remained essentially unchanged. This suggests that the pests, however foreign their origins, quickly became integrated into the local political and cultural landscape. They ruled, yes, but they also became part of what it meant to be Polish. New mysteries emerging. The DNA analysis has delivered actual proof about the mysterious origins of Poland's first royal family. The PA carry genetic markers that trace back to Scotland, specifically to ancient Pict populations. This is no longer speculation or educated guessing. This is science, and this is evidence locked inside their very DNA, but solving one mystery has opened up new ones. Researchers are still hunting for answers. 3 major questions remain unanswered, and they're the kinds of questions that will drive research forward for years to come. First, does that British-leaning genetic line really start with a Pict from Scotland? Or will future DNA samples reveal even older sources? As more PAS remains are sequenced and analyzed, the closest genetic match might change. The picture might become clearer or more complicated. Future excavations at sites like Wobble Castle in Cove, where other PAS princes were buried, could yield additional samples. Each new sample sequenced adds to the genetic database and potentially refines our understanding of the past paternal line. The project is ongoing, not concluded. Second, how many ordinary Poles carried this same genetic variant? Spot samples from Kovalevko and Bragg suggest it was rare among common people, but the data set is small. If this variant was truly rare outside the royal family, it would reinforce the idea of an exclusive foreign lineage, but more samples are needed to be sure. Third, why did the silver stop flowing so suddenly after 170? Researchers suspect a shift in Viking trade routes around 1000 AD disrupted the economic system that had supported the Piast boom, but this remains far from settled. The economic collapse is as much a mystery as the origins of the dynasty itself. Historical sources suggest that Viking trading patterns shifted during this period, with Scandinavian traders increasingly focusing on routes toward Russia and the Mediterranean rather than the Baltic to Rome routes the pasts controlled. If true, this would explain the sudden economic decline. But confirming this theory requires additional archaeological and numismatic evidence. The DNA analysis has solved part of the puzzle. It's delivered actual proof, but it's also revealed how much more there is to discover. The mysterious origins of Poland's first royal family aren't fully solved. They're just becoming clearer sample by sample as research continues. So, does this change how you think about national origins and dynasty? And if you had to choose, would you believe the Piasts were conquerors or were they brought in through royal marriage? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.